Okay, this is a segmented graph, and there's a lot more text, so it's probably more complicated here. Let's take a look. During the first week of April, the Chef Z cooking pan was out of stock at online retailer X. Day 1 shoppers are those shoppers who came to online retailer X's website seeking Chef Z cooking pan. For each of the first 3 days of that week, the graph shows the subsequent behavior of all those Day 1 shoppers who visited the online website seeking Chef Z. Shoppers who came to the website and purchased a different item in lieu of Chef Z paid an average of 25% more for the item. Alright, let's try to understand what's going on here. You have Day 1, Day 2, Day 3. You have these Day 1 shoppers are the shoppers that tried to go on the that came onto the online store because the cooking pan was out of stock. They had to go online to get it. So online they go to get it, and then this color represents 20% purchased a different item and did not revisit the site, and then another 20% did not make a purchase, but then they revisited the next day, and then the remaining 60% did not make a purchase and they did not revisit that week. So for each of the first 3 days, so this is Day 1, Day 2, and Day 3, the graph shows the subsequent behavior of all the Day 1 shoppers. Or so that we're talking about the same group of shoppers from Day 1. Some of these guys from Day 1, revisited the site the next day. So that's this gray portion. And of those that visited the site that day, this is the breakdown. Of those, 32% of that 20% did this. 23% of that 20% did this. So this is basically a blow up, right? This is Day 2 is a blow up of that portion of Day 1. So let me just draw that out. So that's basically So let me just draw that out. That's basically from here blown up like this, right? And then, so if you look at this, did not revisit, only this gray one revisited the next day. So so essentially this one revisited again the third day, and so that blows up over here, right? You see this is a blow up of that, and this is a blow up of this. So the question says some percentage of Day 1 shoppers visited the site on Day 3. Okay, so basically of this, how many actually ended up shopping at the site on Day 3? Okay, so here are your options. It's gonna be less than, it could be around 10% or more, or it could be less, in this range. Okay, well, you basically know all of this is basically this 23%. So 23% of the people in Day 2 actually went to Day 3. So that this 23% is what we're interested in. Well, this 23% represents how much of this 20%? Well, this is basically 1/4, roughly. So you basically take 1/4 of 20% is how much? That's roughly 5%, a little bit less, maybe like 4%. So the answer you're looking for is around 4%, because of this 20%, 1/4 of that, so 4% of them actually went on to go on to the third day. So of these answer choices, between 2 and 5, that's what we're looking for. In part B, the shoppers who purchased substitute items on Day 1 and Day 2 paid a total amount that was approximately what percent of the total all Day 1 shoppers would have paid had each of them been able to purchase Chef Z on Day 1. Okay, so let's break it down. Who purchased substitute items on Day 1 and Day 2? Well, you look at this. Purchased a different item. That's basically this color. So 20% purchased a different item, and then another 32% of that 20% that went over from Day 1 to Day 2 of this gray portion. So 1/3 of this 20%, which is basically if you round 20 to 21 and then divide by 3, that gives you around 7%. So that's 7% of this gray area, and you add the 20% in this teal color, you get a total of 20 plus 7, which is 27%. So around 27% paid 25% more for the item. So let's say the item costs $100. That means this 27% paid $125. Okay, well if everybody, which is, let's say, 100% of the people bought the original item on day 1 for the original price of $100, that would be 100 times 100. So 100 times 100 is what? It's basically $10,000. So the question here is asking you, of that $10,000, these guys, this 27% who paid $125 for the item, that represents what percent of that 10,000? Well, you're going to need to use the calculator for this. So for the calculator, we basically just show this, and you have, okay, so you said $125, right? Because it's 25% more than usual. 125, you multiply that by 27%. So 27. That gives you 3,375. So this represents, their question is asking you, okay, that 3,375, 3,000 around, is what percent of the total amount? The total amount was 10,000. So 3,000 out of 10,000, actually it was like 3,400, 3,300 of that 10,000. That's basically a third. So you look at your answer choices and you have, well, here are your answer choices, and of these, 33 is right there. So 1/3, 33% is what you're looking for. So again, part A, we said it was between 2 and 5%. And for part B, we said it's 33%. Now let's do a recap. We looked at this question, and you understand that there's some process that goes from day 1 to day 2 to day 3. And only a portion of it in day 1 actually comes back to the site the next day. And you have to kind of look at it carefully and say, oh, did not revisit that site, did not revisit that site. Revisited the site the next day. Alright, so only this portion is the one that gets blown up. So that's why we drew these lines here, where this 20% gets blown up here, and this 23% gets blown up there. The first question asks us, well, how many of the people day 1 came back day 3? Well, the only people that came back day 3 were the ones that came back first day 2 and then came back again day 3. So how do we find the amount that goes to day 3? Well, only 23%, this portion goes to day 3. It doesn't matter what the breakdown is here, because we know that's all from this 23%. And this 23% is, this, you have to multiply this by the 20% here that went over there. So that's basically a quarter of that 20%, which is around 5%, a little bit less. And that's why you came up with between 2 and 5%. And then with this part B, it's a little bit more complicated, because you have to pretend that everyone bought something on the first day for, a set amount. And it's always good to pick a number like 100 as an example, because it's easy to work with. And that is, of course, if there are 100% represents 100 people buying, one item at $100 a piece, that's $10,000. Now you have to put that out of that. The people who purchased a substitute item, which is this color, it's around 20%, but it's a little bit more than 20% because actually some people came back the next day and bought a different item. So you have to account for that. So you take a third of that 20%, that's basically 7%. So you combine that 7% with the 20%, you get 27% who bought it at $125. You do the math, so you divide it by the total amount of 10,000, and you arrive at 33%. So this is a relatively more difficult graphics interpretation question.